when did you first cross paths with Stan Getz? He was on the West Coast in the 50s when you were starting.
Well, I heard one record of his about the same time that I heard Those Women. And I remember this one tune. I think it was a lot of different people on it. But he played this tune called "'Tis Autumn." And I just remember, I just loved the sound. And that was it. I never saw Stan. Of course, I knew his name. And I was working with Joe Henderson. We were touring the Midwest. And I don't know how Stan did this because it was like 1972. No cell phones, no computers. He would call me up in my hotel room and tell me rehearsal was the next day. And I would laugh and I'd say, Stan, I'm working. I'm in Chicago or I'm in L.A. I won't be there. Okay, he must have done this 5 or 6 times within 2 weeks. And finally, Joe Henderson, in the middle of our tour, part of his tour got canceled. And so that was toward the end of the tour. So Stan called again asking the same question. And I said, well, I'll be there. So I never saw him. I never heard him in person. I didn't know what he looked like more than from a picture. But the band that I had gotten together and had played a lot with was Billy Hart and Clint Houston. They were in my trio, and they're recorded on Choice Records.
It's a burning album.
Yes,
absolutely.
And so they were the rhythm section in Stan's band. So I didn't even know if I wanted to work with Stan, but when I heard that, Billy Hart and Clint was the rhythm section, I thought this is really going to be fun. And it was.
A lot of the world is suffering, and jazz has gone from a street music and basically a black subculture music to an elitist music. And I think it's important to talk to cats that are willing to lower themselves down and talk about sort of overcoming adversity. I mean, we're talking about a guy like Stan Getz. This was a Jekyll and Hyde character. So my question for you is, once you got to know him, okay, please describe for me how he treated you personally.
Well, it was really fun because both of us were extremely psychic. So I always knew what was going to happen, and, I just had fun with it.
Explain what you mean by Stan was psychic.
Well, I don't want to use this name, but there was a piano player that had been in his band before, and for some reason, I don't know whether he thought I was friends with that piano player or what his thing was, but every time he thought the band wasn't quite doing what he might want it to do, he would mention this person's name, and he would know the placement of his body and how the sound, would travel. He would know what I had to have heard and not. So every time he mentioned that person's name, and I had no reason, I mean, the guy was a friend of mine, but I had not, particularly. But whenever he would do that, Billy Hart had already told me that Stan hates hats. So every time he would mention that person's name, I would wear a hat that night. A big hat.
Yeah, possibly Richie Byrack, maybe. The thing is that, because Byrack, I talked to him a couple weeks ago, and he said that Stan, he went in to ask for a raise one time, and before he could even get the words out of his mouth, Stan said no. Stan knew what was in his mind.
Uh-huh.
I mean...
Well, I'll tell you the other thing that happened, because Stan... one time we were in South America, and we're walking to the concert hall. And, of course, everybody's pretty much tired all the time because we're working every night and traveling a lot. Anyway, he handed me his saxophone. So I took the saxophone, and the next person walking along the street, I handed it to them. I mean, that's just, we had this relationship, like, it would be funny. It wasn't like, nobody was ever mad, but it was just like this thing. And then one time, I don't know what he did. He did something. Anyway, he thought that I might not like something he did. So I didn't know this, and we're in this dressing room, and it's filled with lockers. There's maybe 200 lockers that go from the floor to the ceiling. That was our band room. And unbeknownst to me, he had bought a huge bouquet of flowers for me because evidently he thought I don't know, maybe he had said Richie's name and I wore the hat. Okay. So
this is great.
I started dancing around the room. I didn't know anything. I came in and I felt good, and he was there, and it was before the show. And I just started dancing around the room. And then I went to a locker and opened it up. And you know what was inside.
I do, the bouquet.
So I don't know. That's how I learned the piano. I'm telling you, my whole life is like that. Things just come and they're there.
Well,
If you asked me to do that, I could never do that. But things always happen like that to me.
So please just riff on Stan and how you guys were similar from a personal point of view.
Well, I don't know how to answer that, but one thing I did notice about Stan is like the way that he spoke was the same way that he played. You know, he'd play a solo. He wouldn't play anything but what he wanted to hear. And when he spoke, his sentences would be just like somebody had written the script and rehearsed them 50 times and took out all the extra words and things. He would just speak them, and it was just like when he played.
It was a stream of consciousness and there was no editing. I mean, it was like...
No, that's just the way that he was.
Right.
I thought that was very interesting, I thought.
And
Monica wasn't very far removed from that wife that...
Yes. Well, I know she... Can you explain how similar she
was?
Well,
she was... she had a way where she could easily relate in that way, but she would know what she was doing and do it on purpose. Stan was always like that. I never saw him when he wasn't exactly like that. Well, she was like most people, but she had an elegance to her that I think that's an elegance that's the best way I could describe it, the way that he talked and the way he played. And she had an elegance about her, too.